All right, I see some folks are still logging in. Welcome. Thanks for popping in a little bit early. We're going to get started in just a few minutes at 10 past the hour. So please enjoy the soft jazz while we get ready. Refresh your water, your coffee, whatever you need. And feel free to post in the chat what your highlight of the event has been so far. If you want to give a shout out to any of our presenters that you think did a great job, feel free to share in the chat what your highlights have been so far. Thanks, Annabelle. Thanks, Patty. Yes, I heard there was a huge turnout for Martha and Company. Heard good things about that session as well. Thank you for the feedback, Mitra. That's awesome. For those of you logging in, we're going to start in just one more minute. Refresh that coffee or water. We will kick off the closing panel in just a moment. I'm glad you like the jazz. Thank you. Yes, and another shout out to Irina and Annabelle for a great presentation. Thank you. And the poster sessions, wasn't that fun? That's new this year. All right, I have 10 after, so I want to respect everybody's time. I know we still have some folks that are making their way over from wrapping up concurrent sessions. So we will welcome them as they come in. But I am going to, unfortunately, silence the jazz. But I'm going to kick off our closing panel session. So I want to welcome you all back. I hope you've enjoyed the program so far. And I don't know about you, but I have been looking forward to this closing panel all morning. I think it's going to be a great way to wrap up our event and send you off with some great ideas. But I'll just share very quickly to set the tone. I think we can all agree that diversity, equity, and inclusion has always been an important topic in our field. But I think in the last year or two, it's really been revealed that we still have a long way to go in identifying and incorporating best practices, particularly in the online environment. So here today to discuss the future of their perspectives on this important topic is an incredible panel of experts led by Tina Calandrino, our Associate Instructional Designer here at the University of Central Florida. You may also know Tina from her work with the Top Kit Workshop and the Florida Distance Learning Association, FDLA. And I don't want to take any time away from them. So it is my honor to stop sharing the screen and to introduce Tina. And I invite you, Tina, to introduce your fellow colleagues on this distinguished panel.
Well, thank you so much, Wendy. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to invite such an esteemed panel here today. I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order, and they are just an amazing bunch of people. And some of them have been friends and colleagues for many years. But the most important thing is these are leaders in our industry. And I want to start with Dr. Genevieve Feliu. She currently serves as the Vice President of Innovation for Capella University, and she actually founded their Learning Lab, a research and design focused effort to test and learn what works to motivate and engage busy adult learners. She's an innovator, a behavioral scientist, as well as a designer. And Dr. Feliu combines extensive academic expertise with human-centered design, user experience research, and product design expertise with agile course development methodologies. This way, she can effect a sustainable student-centered digital learning experience that is inclusive, inspiring, and transformative. Her key successes include improving the learning experience for over 23,000 learners, launching a lab-led innovation product in 60 courses, and designing 8 game-based learning prototypes and integrating 5 EdTech products in 2021 alone. Recognizing that design changes typically impact instructional practices, Dr. Feliu led training efforts to integrate this EdTech into their instructional practices for over 60 faculty members. And this directly leads to the 16 top-ranked faculty in the university, who then in turn serve over 14,000 students with their first course experience in 2021 to gain more of this effort. My other wonderful colleague that many of you may know is Dr. Rohan Jawala. And currently he is a senior instructional designer here at the University of Central Florida. But Dr. Jawala has a passion for addressing topics connected to education, social justice, inclusion, and diversity. He has also presented in these areas and written on these topics, and he has presented at several international conferences and has several peer-reviewed publications. He also has just recently published a book and has several published book chapters and continues to work for developing publications in this DEI area. He's a very popular public speaker, and Dr. Jawala draws from his own life experiences and the experience of others to stimulate thoughtful and engaging conversations on critical issues that impact our daily lives. Dr. Jawala currently has over 1,500 subscribers and produces weekly content, which is published on YouTube and LinkedIn. So you can find him there after this conference very easily. And Dr. Marcia McGriff has more than 2 decades of experience in developing and leading strategic efforts to support diversity and inclusion in higher education. She is so needed that in this last year, she joined the University of Florida as their Chief Diversity Officer and the Senior Advisor to the President at the University of Florida. Prior to coming to UF, she served as an Associate Vice President for Inclusive Excellence at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, where she led the campus in creating the first Inclusive Excellence Strategic Design Plan. Prior to arriving at Ball State, she was the director at Hudson and Holland Scholars Program in the Office of the Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Multicultural Affairs in Indiana University in Bloomington. She previously served as Director of Student Services and Admissions at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University and the Director of Nina Mason's Pulliam Legacy Scholars Program at the Indiana University, Purdue University in Indianapolis. And Dr. George Oji is the interim chair and associate professor of hospitality and tourism management program at the University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, Princess Anne, Maryland. That was a mouthful. It's in Salisbury, Maryland, as we learned. Before this position, he was the department head and professor of the Business and Hospitality Management Department at Warwick Community College. And he earned his doctorate in specializations in higher ed leadership in 2005, and has gone on from there to be a certified hospitality educator from the American Hotel and Lodging Institute. He's a diversity coordinator at the Yacht and Beach Club Resort at the Walt Disney Resort in Florida. And he's presented and spoken at conferences on the issues of diversity and inclusive communications, issues of disability, stereotypes, biases, generational issues, group and individual differences, and the use of appreciative language in communication and feedback. He recently conducted cultural diversity, inclusion, and communication microaggression trainings for the city of Ocean City, Maryland, and Wicomo Health Departments in Salisbury, Maryland. He's won numerous awards from everything from the Partners in Excellence given by the Walt Disney Company to being awarded in 2019 the Worcester County Drug and Alcohol Abuse Award for Outstanding Achievement in Prevention. The governor, Larry Hogan, and Senator Chris Van Hollins of Maryland also presented him with citations for his work in drug and alcohol abuse prevention. So I believe that we all can say we're very honored to have everybody here and being a part of this. We'd really like to start out by asking some opening questions that is going to provoke thought and a little bit of discussion during this panel, but also after. And I wanted to start with a quote from 40 years ago. Nelson Mandela said that education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. So that being understood, that we're all here as educators, what is your definition of inclusion? And what does it mean to you to have innovation in education for change? You'll need to unmute your microphones, and any of the four of you can start.
I'll go ahead and start. This is George.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me in this panel. It's an honor to be among these distinguished ladies and gentlemen and everyone watching. It shows 91 people, so thank you. When I hear the word inclusion, what comes to mind is not for somebody to be included in something, but somebody to be a part of something, to be not only to be involved in it, but to participate in it, to be a part of the decision making. We can take a step back to say, hey, we would like to include everybody's point of view in something, not just to get the idea of what the person is saying, but to analyze that idea to see how it can be incorporated in. And I always tell my faculty, I say, listen, we can come to class every day and instruct the students and teach the students. But we also need to realize that those students, they have life experiences. We have students from 19 years old to 45 to 50 years old. They have life experiences that could be incorporated into the classroom. So if we listen to those students and we incorporate their views into the classroom, they are being inclusive. So inclusion is hearing what somebody has to say and taking what that person has to say and make it part of the process, whether it's part of the vision, part of the mission, part of the purpose. That is what inclusion is. So inclusion to me is involvement and participation, hearing their voices and using those voices as part of the way things are done, the norm of any organization.
Very well said. Very well said. Any of our other panelists want to chime in on this?
I was thinking that I just see inclusion as an intentional curation of systems, policies, procedures, infrastructure, and behaviors that make someone feel as if they belong. And as a DE&I strategist, executive level strategist, I think that that is not just my role. It's not just my job to do that. And my job is to help develop that strategy, but to also empower others in the university to understand and know that they are a part of curating systems, policies, procedures, infrastructure, and behaviors that make people feel as if they belong there. So I would flip the word inclusion to also incorporate belonging and that sense and that feeling and knowing that where you are is where you're supposed to be, and you feel like the people who are there make you feel like you belong there. And all of us have had those instances in our lives where you've walked in a space and you just know in your soul and your spirit that they just don't accept you in some kind of a way. So it's the vibe that people put off. And I think that that's just the way I view it.
I think that's very important. I love that idea of belonging and inclusion, and that all of our voices need to be heard. And that's the point of innovation. How do we get there? How do we get to this? So we have a lot of barriers that definitely limit our ability to get to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But before we really talk about some of the benefits and consequences from those barriers, what are successes and outcomes that your organization has realized by having more voices being included, and what are best practices that you use? Genevieve, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. You have really expanded something for multi-learners and a lot of returning learners of different age groups and cultural groups. So what has been some of your best practices for this, for achieving innovations through DEI?
Yeah, I definitely want to build on Dr. OJ's comments of it's not just invite them into the room. And as you said, Dr. McGriff, it's not just let them say their opinion, thanks, bye, right? Like it's much more important than that. You know, the way I think about innovation is we are building things for people, by people, with people at the end of the day. And it really doesn't you can build the most fabulous, beautiful thing in the world, but if it doesn't resonate with everyone who's going to use that innovation, then you really haven't been successful in that innovation. And so we've worked very hard. I'm a big fan of crowdsourcing innovation. Innovation can and should come from anywhere in the organization. And the other thing, one of the things I really love to do, I find a lot of joy in it, and the people reflect back to me that they appreciate it, is I sit in a position where I can help move a project from one space to another. And one of the things I really love to do is matchmaking. And so you may have an idea, it may not be big enough for my team to take on. You may need more than I can offer you, but what I can do is find the person who knows that world and can help you put more around that project or move that project forward, or make external connections and things like that. So we've really leaned hard into those two ideas, crowdsourcing it and matchmaking as an idea that allows that every idea we want it to breathe. We wanted to give it room to breathe, and we want to get it in front of the right people to help that idea breathe.
That's wonderful. And Dr. McGriff has had a lot of successes too. Can you share some of your best practices that you did to bring up a lot of these programs that affected campus-wide?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to the word intentionality, and not just, there's a lot of well-meaning and well-intentioned hearts and souls on campuses. I do think that work, though, needs to be structured. It needs to be driven from the very highest places in the university, and getting that buy-in about how important it is to build that important infrastructure for DE&I, innovation, and all of that encompasses. And so that intentionality for me has been the bedrock of my career. Being able to position myself in my offices, as particularly in the CEO space, as the space to serve and support you, and to empower you to do the work. And I think that if we continue to look at just that one person or that one office to do the work, then we're missing out on the opportunity to see how empowering and impactful we all can be as a collective. And so one of the things I like to do when I do a session is I have people to touch the top of their head and say, I am inclusive excellence. ACNU was very intentional about utilizing the terminology inclusive excellence as an expansion of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it is the work of every one of us within our specific contexts to build the bridges to inclusion and innovation in this space. And so you are very much responsible. You are on your own individual journey, and how that journey intersects with your professional and social lives, I think, is where the nexus of this work is.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was very well said. And I am big on adding in and adding power that will connect things. So that's a new thing that I'm going to be implementing with my talks that I do. And I would like to open up to Dr. Oji and Dr. Jawala. You gentlemen are on the front lines. You affect people in classrooms. You are both instructors also. How would you say the most difficult part of implementing inclusion has been, especially in the last couple of years?
You know, when I look at the question, I say this is heavy loaded. And I think when we look at implementing programs, we make the assumption that inclusion is, when you take it forward to what that implementation is about, funding or getting buy-in. But on reflection, I think one of the most challenging things in designing any program is the design itself. When I look at it really, you know, how do we make someone more inclusive? Do we send them through a training session? Do we issue a credentialing? So I think when we look at programs that are developed, I think one of the most limiting factors associated, is the issue of critical reflection. Let me say categorically, there cannot be an inclusive program without critical reflection. Without critical reflection, there can be no behavioral change. And this is one of the most challenging components to add on. Yes, I'm going to say this because talk regarding inclusion is going to be uncomfortable. Hence, any program that is designed without a critical component that does not or will not engage individuals to have that critical reflection on their own actions regarding how their own actions can include or exclude, can reproduce or reduce discriminatory practices, then that program is not worthwhile. And I see so many people running away from the part that there needs to be critical reflection. So I say one of the most challenging part is that. Another point I'd like to add is that without these sort of components, then we trivialize the issues that we need to address. You know, I see programs that start with a privilege walk and then there's no other reflection. We have to go past that one to a more in-depth thoughtfulness of what is required. You know, I didn't give my definition regarding inclusion, but it has to do with your change in behavior, your perspective, your critical reflection on how your position can impact those who are going to be disenfranchised by your actions or be included by your actions. Inclusion is an action word and requires action, not documentation to guide, but actions along with documentation can complement each other.
Very well said. Very well said. Dr. Oji, I welcome you too. And Dr. Fairview or Dr. McGriff, you certainly are welcome to speak up too.
Yeah, let me just quickly add to what Dr. Jawala has said. When he was speaking, a lot of things were running through my head. I just recently formed a committee which I chaired to review our curriculum, and it's just been reviewed and been accepted. During the when the previous chair asked people to volunteer for it, nobody wanted to do it. But I volunteered. I didn't know I was the only one until it was time to get to work. Then I said, okay, may I have the names of those who are on the committee so that I could reach out to them? Then she said, well, guess what? It's you, yourself, and yourself. Then I said, why? She said, because they see curriculum modification, curriculum development as too difficult because of the work they put into it. Then I said, good, I like that. This is why we need to include them in it, using the word inclusion. So I said, okay, please talk to X, and X. That do you want them to be a part of the committee, to include them in the committee? One of them have been here for 20 years, one 5 years, one the first semester. to get a 20-year perspective. Where were we 20 years ago? How did we get here? When you came in 5 years ago, how was it? You've just been in for 2 months. How is it? Just like me, I've only been here for 7 months. So I wanted to get those perspectives. So then when we started developing the curriculum, there was a lot of pushbacks from who has been here for 20 years because the comfortability of the zone. Then I said, okay, let's look at this curriculum as a frame, as a house, okay? We're gonna build the house, then the owner of the house is gonna close and start living in the house. Then maybe after 2 or 3 years, say, you know what? I think we need to change this. I think we need to change that. I think this one needs to be bigger, whatever it is. So you start changing the house. I said, let's look at the curriculum like that. Then when we see what we want to change, we change it in the broader sense of the curriculum or within the courses. So speaking specifically for me, who is in the classroom, one thing I do is, I'm sure everybody knows that we use student evaluation. I pretty much plead with the student. I say, please, I beg you, please complete the course evaluation, complete the faculty evaluation. I said, you can say I am the best professor you ever had, but give me the reason why I am the best. You can say I am the worst, but give me the reason why I am the worst and how can I improve? So I say, if you just say clearly outstanding, you have not helped me. Yes, my rate is up, but you have not really given me why I'm clearly outstanding. The poorest, you can click that, but you have not given me a reason. So give me a reason. So personally, I take those information and I use it to change how I facilitate the course in the classroom. And one of them that I actually implemented the next semester, or I continue, was when one of the students said, I like the way you pick the teams for the team projects. In the past, other instructors just asked us to get into team. Then those who already know themselves, they are in one team. But you randomly pick it. The people that you picked with me, I have never even spoken to them for the 2 years I have been in this school. But I happen to have spoken to them because of that. So this is how I include inclusion, and this is how I encourage inclusion in my classroom. Even though I know who they are, I still want to put, okay, these are the strongest in academics, these are the good ones, these are the fair ones. So I want to put all those in a different category so that the most intelligent, or if I use that word, those who are stronger will be able to mentor those who are not, then include their perspective into it. And not only that, and I give them directions. I tell them there are no social loafers in my classroom. So I give 2 categories of grades. I grade them as a team, I grade them as individuals. So there will be individual production and team production. And I have found that to be very well effective in the classroom. So I encourage professors to do that. And not only that, I tell them anytime you want to meet, there's a contract. You have to fill out when you are meeting. It doesn't matter whether you're going to meet in Starbucks or in the library or in the computer lab. You need to talk about each person. There are 4 of you. What is each person going to do before you meet? And what did you discuss? So that's the contract. That's the team contract. They fill that out. They send it to me. After they meet, they fill another one out to say, this is what we're going to do. Then when they finish, they say, this is what they've done. So I compare those 2. So that is how I monitor their productions. And that is how I get all of them included in anything that they do in class. And as I keep implementing it, then they realize, oh, he actually listens and reads the evaluation. And many of them have come to tell me that. And I think that works all the time.
That's wonderful. And I saw a lot of head nods with this across the panelists and across our audience. And I think that's because we forget that we have our own biases that we bring in. And the more that we mix with different cultures and different people and hear those different voices, the more that we can affect change in the classroom, in the university, and as educators. Before we move on, Wendy asked if Dr. Jawala could give a little more insight into Privilege Walk. I don't believe that everybody knows what that is, but if you could please expand on that, I think that many of us would be enlightened.
Yes, Privilege Walk is normally the start of an inclusion setting where individuals are asked to start in a line or so forth, and they're given several descriptors. If you are a student who is have not taken a student loan, or someone without a student loan, step one, take one step forward. If you had to take a student loan, you take one step backward, and it gives you a lot of variables. And at the end of several prompted responses, you find where you are. And all the time you have, just to put it in street talk, we have minorities who end up at the back of the line based on their historical connection, which demonstrates the importance of taking a holistic approach for inclusive practices and innovation. That's a synopsis.
Please, before you go further, the reason I was laughing is that was one of the activities I did in Ocean City, privilege walk. 90% of the participants were white or Caucasian or non-Hispanic, whichever word you want to use. And some of them was, one of the questions was, if you have a minority friend, step forward. If you don't have a minority friend, step backward. Most of the white people step backward. If you never take school loan, step forward. Different questions. You have a problem with drug addiction in your family, and so on and so forth. And it was amazing what you saw, or what I saw in this privilege walk. Then when it came to discussing it, not very many people were ready to discuss it because of the uncomfortability. I think it was, sorry, I can't remember, one of this esteemed panelists talk about inclusion is not a very comfortable thing to discuss. Diversity is not a very comfortable discussion, but we have to talk about it. It's pretty obvious. It's just like we were speaking one time in a meeting, it was not about diversity, where somebody said, I don't see color. I had to stop the person right there. I said, what do you mean you don't see color? Yes, you see color. When you say you don't see color, you are just denying somebody's existence. Can you rephrase that sentence to actually say what you mean? So yes, Dr. Joala, when you were saying it, I was just shaking my head, because privilege work was one of the things I did in the activities, and it was, I was amazed at the result. So sorry, I took a long time, but I just.
No, that's what we're here for. This is a discussion as much as it is just answering questions. What do you all prompt? What do you all see? And Wendy's asking about critical reflection and getting into that. And as I see Dr. McGriff's UF's Black History Month, I reflect being a child of the 70s and people saying, why do we need a Black History Month? Well, it's very obvious, 40, 50 years later, why we have to have this, why we need to highlight these things and these efforts. And that's why we're all here today. Some of us, this is uncomfortable talk. We're in a system that was not designed by us. Nobody that looked like me was part of the design. So we now have that opportunity to redesign and to implement diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Joala and I try not to say the word diverse. We want to just say equity and inclusion. So how do we do this? How do we start implementing that? How do we get to critical reflection? I'll open it up to all of you. Dr. Feliu, Dr. McGriff, you have a lot of influence at your universities to implement these innovations through equity and inclusion. Anyone, please answer. What do we see? How do we see?
One of the things that I've done, and Genevieve, go ahead.
Oh, no, please.
Really quickly, we do an exercise called Who's at Your Table? And we have participants, particularly those who are decision makers, to look at who are the people around their table who help them to make decisions. Who do they consult with? Who's a part of a board or a council or their core committee? To take stock of those individuals, write their names down. Then we teach about inclusion, and then we tell them to reimagine an inclusive table. Whose voices should be included at the table when you're making these critical decisions? What are some of the factors that you want to consider? So we give them a few different types of samples. Obviously, you're not going to know everything about a person, but there are some things that you do know. And how you come to know those things is through the relationship building that we all engage in some form or fashion. But reimagining that inclusive table is where we want them to get to. And that is the exercise. And it is always, always, always enlightening. Because if everybody around the table looks like you, that's not necessarily the best place for innovation, right? And so it can be even more innovative space when you have diverse perspectives and individuals represented fully in the decision making and thought making process.
Exactly. I firmly believe that too. Dr. Feliu, you were saying?
Well, so I'm very much on the ground in the doing, right? And so one of my personal approaches to all of this is really about showing. And so I'm not in a lot of areas where it would be appropriate for me to say, let's have a conversation about inclusion. So instead, what I do is say, okay, we're going to show it in real time. So one of the things that has become very important to me is to have the person or the team who comes up with the idea present it. But that is very challenging. And if you have, let's say you're young in your career, newer in your space, and I come into you and say, hey, that's a great idea. You should present it to the provost. People are instantly, they're nervous. They don't know how to go into that space. They don't have experience in that space. So one of the things that we've done is we've built a whole experience around that, where come to us with your ideas. We help you flesh it out and all that, but then we actually take you through a series of, I'll call them trainings. They're more sharing and reflective conversations, and we talk you through it. This is how you should present. These are the kinds of things you should bring. This is the group that you're going to be talking to. They're going to understand information very differently than other folks that maybe you've talked to, or people who actually do the work every day. And that has been very empowering for me, as well as the individual, and more importantly for the individuals, but it has been very meaningful to me as well, because it's really helped me understand how to give a hand up to others in ways that's very meaningful. It's very practical. And I really want to help these individuals grow their networks, because good ideas and good innovation, again, they come from all over. The challenge is if you don't position it in quite the right way, you may not be heard. Well, how are you going to position it in the right way if you haven't had that experience? How are you going to get that experience if somebody doesn't invite you into the room? But then you don't want to invite them into the room and it be a terrible, very poor experience. You don't want that either. So that's one of the things that we focused on. Before I surrender the mic really quickly, Tina, I wanted to observe one quick comment about what is really challenging around inclusion and equity. And I just wanted to observe one thing for me is that I think one thing we don't talk about enough, and I would love to hear the panelists' thoughts on this, because I do not know the answer to this question. But one thing I don't think we talk about enough is that when we bring more voices into the room, we create a much bigger set of perspectives, which is great. But it also creates this tension point for others, right? Like, how do I take in these new perspectives? How do I connect them with my existing perspectives? Your perspective is challenging something I've believed a very long time. And so I think what we don't always prepare for is the conflict that comes with diverse perspectives and how to really navigate that. So I would love to hear what my colleagues think about that if others are interested in that question, because it is a big challenge every day to navigate that, I think.
Yeah,
that's a wonderful question.
I would take a little go at that. Thanks, Tina. I think when we think about inclusion, we have to understand that where we have inclusion, we have different voices. Where we have different voices, we're going to have things that like competition or competition for perspectives to be dominant. And we have to be aware of that. How we go about this now, I go through the process of critical reflection again, because what I realize as I speak to people across a range of organizations, they're saying that they're being left out of the inclusion debate. Being left out means they're left out because of their gender, and I'm not talking one specific gender. I'm talking about males complaining too, females complaining. And I think when you go through the process of thinking, you have to critically reflect, how are you going to balance these perspectives? Without balance, there's going to be unstableness in that organization. I've seen where boardrooms across the globe in several places have changed from one dominant gender to the next. How do we create that balance of diversity rather than tilting the scale to one dimension? I think that's so important. So I think another movement in the diversity inclusion process and equity process is thinking about how we balance these perspectives, but I don't think we're there yet. We're still struggling to get these boardrooms diverse, and there's a drastic shift in them. And that's just my thought for now, but I don't think we're there yet.
And I would add, and Dr. Joella, Rohan, I really love critical reflection, by the way. So it's like, I'm stealing it. You might, I'm gonna say critical reflection, I'm just wear it out. But what I will say though, is that there's a book by Luana Harris that it's called Diversity Beyond Lip Service. And one of the tenets of the commit model is to make room for controversy and conflict, and then to kind of unpack what that means. You know, whenever we have diverse conversations that are uncomfortable, you know, you even get a physical, visceral response, right? Your stomach hurts, you know, my underarms get sweaty. But how do we help individuals to lean into that discomfort, right? And then how do we teach practices that when that controversy and conflict happens, what do you do? So we have a session called calling in versus calling out. And we also have a methodology that we use called the oops and the ouch, which helps to mitigate and manage mistakes, because that's the issue, right? Because sometimes people don't want to engage in this work because they're afraid they're going to do what? They're going to make a mistake. They're going to trip into something, fall down, and be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just said or did that. So the oops and the ouch works like this. You create a space where someone can say, ouch. You know, I felt there's some kind of way about what you said, but you also give the same grace to the person who said, to say, oops, I didn't really mean to do that. So the oops and the ouch. And then what we do at that point is move to what we call recovery and repair of the relationship, of the whatever the situation is, because that is the goal, so that we can keep the innovation and keep the diverse conversations, and even if they're controversial, but making space for that, allowing grace for the oops and the ouch. And I think that calling in versus calling out. And so what does calling in mean? It means saying, hey, I felt this way. And that could be an oops and ouch scenario. As opposed to calling out, I felt this way, and then you got a whole nother vibe, whole nother set of energy flowing in the space.
Very well said. I'm loving how you all are feeding off of each other with this. And I think that critical reflection is going to be a new buzzword for all of us here. So thank you for that, Dr. Joella. And we did have a question in the chat, and it kind of goes along with one of the things that I was going to ask. All four of you have advocated for the change in education, for DEI. You are frontline with it in many different aspects. So the question comes, how do we respond to policymakers? And maybe not just our leadership within our institutions, but policymakers who prevent and even criminalize DEI efforts. How do we do that? And we're at a variety of universities here and a variety of people that are represented within our universities. So we want to do the best. What is your thoughts on all of this?
You know what? That is kind of interesting. I wanted to say this is above my pay grade, but you know what? I am here, so I'm going to have to answer, respond to the question.
We didn't pay you too much to come, so.
I appreciate you, Tina. By the way, if you don't know me and Tina, we've known each other for years, and we used to work in a place that is less diverse. So that's a different story.
Conversation, definitely.
Yeah. I attended a DEI conference last June. And the president of this university, I hope I don't sleep and mention the university, said, our institution has been PWI, predominantly white institution. Initially, I didn't know what that word meant. I had to Google it. Then I realized what it meant. She said the population of the student body was 98% Caucasian, then 2% minority. So you can throw any number of people you want to consider minority in there. However, within a 5-mile radius, there are, I think if I remember very well, 3 middle schools and 2 high schools within the institution, and they are all minority, predominantly minority middle school and high school. Yet they don't recruit from there. So to answer your question, what the administration or administrator, they were comfortable with it because of funding, alumni, endowments, and everything. But in her words, as the administration started to retire, but she didn't use the word retire. She said as they start to die off, they were bringing in new perspective, new blood into the institution. And those new blood and new eyes were seeing things differently. That was where the changes started to happen. So how did they make those changes? They started to use students. Instead of them using faculty and recruiters and admission reps to go to these high schools, which they've never done, they decided, no, we're not going to do that. They use students. They took students to this school to talk to these high school students and middle school students. Then they provided them mentors. So some of them mentored the students from grade 9 to grade 12, to the 12th grade. And some of them who never thought of going to college or who never thought of going to this institution ended up attending this institution. The same thing they did with the middle school. So their minority enrollment grew within 5 years of these new people coming in, and they could not believe it. In other words, the population has been there, but the previous administration just was comfortable in what they are doing. So how do we make those changes? What do we do with policymakers? We're all voters. We vote them out. If we can vote, the administration within the school, we can't terminate them, but as they start to retire, maybe we need to start looking for people who have different perspective or look to the outside to bring people in, because fresh eyes are always good to see things that comfortable eyes have not seen. So that is how that institution changed. So that's my response to your question. How do we make those changes? Policymakers, we vote them out because we have the power to vote. But on the other hand, since we are within the institution, we can keep advocating. We don't advocate. As they retire, maybe we bring fresh eyes in there to take a look at things.
100%. Vote, vote, vote. And also, the 4 of you are also very frontline on advocating for this change and advocating for success in small ways and in very large ways also. I put a link to something that advocates change that you were talking about, getting into a school early, helping underprivileged kids go forth and prosper. And that is the Tangible Park Project by our own Rosen Harris and Chuck Jubin. So anybody who's not familiar with that can click on the link for that. So thank you for that. If anybody else would like to add some specific ways you think that you advocate for change, I know Dr. Jawala, not just in your book, but you are out speaking to many places in the, not just in the education industry, but out in just the public. You're an invited speaker all over the place. Is this your way of advocating for change, or is there something else we're overlooking?
No, I think you're right on spot, because I want to say this. I've sat on many inclusive committees in UK and in the United States, and I realize because I'm within that institution, there are some guidelines. So what I've done, I have said to myself, I do not have a long time on earth. And if I'm waiting for myself and others to be included, it's going to be a long, long wait. So I've somewhat taken my message outside of the institution, because I think when you look at society is a reflection, or an institution is a reflection of the society. If we can make that change outside, then internally in various organizations, you can have that change. And I think people are more receptive, because when you think about what's happening and what has happened over the last 2 years, there's a need for greater inclusivity not just in relation, and I want to say this too, not just in relation to race and gender, because we have students online who do not have the capacity to engage as they should, because, for example, they were never given the opportunity to have an educational testing done to know, so they know what is their learning disabilities. And they come online now unable to cope. So we have to really think about inclusion with a broader spectrum too, because having that narrow vision regarding inclusion based on race and gender, especially in the online environment, will kind of limit and exclude others who are trying desperately to cope with their online education. I just wanted to do that plug at that point regarding inclusion.
And I invite our other two panelists, especially Dr. McGriff, who has the ear of the president of University of Florida, and you too, Dr. Feliu, who has the ear of the entire university with your innovation lab. Care to answer, how do we make these changes?
Well, my take is I just never stop. I'm known for being pretty relentless. And one comment that was raised here is kind of what happens when your administration doesn't support DI efforts, equity and inclusion efforts for today's panel. I'm very lucky. I work with a president who is very tuned into this. He's a community activist. He's very engaged. And I've learned a lot by working with such an individual that's so knowledgeable in the space. So that's been really wonderful. But a side story I will share is that there has been in the past some hesitation by other leaders to kind of lean into this. And what I found really worked is that there were a core group of people that just kept raising the issue. We need a diversity officer. We want a diversity officer. Where is our diversity officer? And eventually we got our diversity officer put into place and installed, Dr. Charlene Hilleman. She's fantastic. And that was really helpful to me to understand that you actually can hold administration accountable. You just have to keep raising your voice and kind of be fairly relentless about it, that this is something that we care about. There's a group of us that really care about this, and we aren't going to go away because the silence is really the most dangerous part of the conversation. And then, Marcia, what would you add to that? I'm sure you have a greater depth of experience than I do there.
Thanks. I think you're pretty awesome. I would say though that I think that I love that whole concept of being relentless. And so these are my noise canceling earbuds. You see them? They are the bomb. And so put those on while you're doing this work. There's lots of noise. Keep on moving. Keep on doing the work. Be relentless. Keep making those policies. Keep building those programs. Keep forming those groups. Because in the absence of specifics on how these things will be implemented and what the consequences of them are, if we're talking for some of the questions that are in the chat, in the absence of all of that, put your noise canceling earbuds on and keep it moving.
Marcia, you might like my teammate was teasing me, and we've named it in our team the Charm Offensive. We are coming. We are going to be charming, but we are going to be relentless, and we are on the offense. We are not going to go away. So we've enjoyed that particular phrase.
I like that. I like being part of the Charm Offensive. It's going to be my new phrase. So
yes.
Beautifully said. Cancel it out, continue to advocate, and continue to be the change that you want to see. So I think that's very clear. We also had a really interesting question that kind of brings us maybe back to point one, rather than how are we going to affect change in leadership and in our states and our national politics. Kevin Hewlin asked, thinking about human nature versus nurture, it's important and necessary to ensure that diversity is a phenotype led to diversity of ideas. Is there more to diversity than physical appearance? And I think we all would say absolutely. I'm posting the question here in the chat for everybody to see yet again. So I know, Dr. Jawala, we talk about this. I advocate for disabilities, age, gender. The biases are real. They're out there. They're very fluid. Female, color of skin, cultural biases from even being raised in the South, being raised in another country. I'll let any of your panelists jump in on this question. It's very, very important that we see this.
Unquestionably, there is much more to diversity than gender and race. And I think if you stop there, then you are continuing to cut off a whole nother bit of knowledge that's going to help you with whatever you're trying to succeed with. Really, for me, the way I think about this is diversity for me is about diversity in thought, diversity in skill set. I want to surround myself with people who are better than I am at things that I am not good at for obvious reason. Inclusion is different for me. Inclusion is about voice. So that's really how I think about these two ideas. And I think it's important that you include both of those, because you're not going to be able to think, again, I'm in the innovation space in terms of rolling out projects and products that people are going to use. You're never going to predict how every single person is going to use that. But the more thought you have around it, the more diversity of thought, the more diversity in approach you have, the better what you're going to design is going to be. And then inclusion takes us back to, did you bring people into the conversation that have something to say? And I think all of that to me comes down to, we talk about innovation as an action and as a verb. Really, innovation is a fancy word for co-creation. If you're not co-creating, you're not innovating. You're just designing something in your back office by yourself that you are going to love. And that's fantastic. And there's great moments for that. But if you actually want other people to adopt and lean into this, whether it's a mindset, I used to teach sociology, cultural diversity, these are hard topics for people. If you want people to come in and lean into that, or call into that conversation, using that slightly differently, Marcia, then you need to have both of those on your radar, in my mind, to make that successful. So that's how we think about
it. Yeah, just to add to what you just said, it's kind of interesting. I used to work in this institution where about, I would say maybe 75% of the students' body, Caucasian, 20% African American, then 5% all other minorities. However, in about, I think the faculty member, about 60 of them, there were only 2 who are African Americans, myself and one other professor teaching science. So the student body does not reflect the faculty body. But I keep finding out that each time they want to hire somebody, they want to form a search committee, they always call me to be a part of the search committee. Then I had to ask the question, wait a minute, why do you people always call me to be a part of the search committee? The first question I got was, oh, they said you always have a good insight. I said, really? Good insight. Okay, I didn't argue. Then eventually I went to the HR. I said, I have issues with me always being a member of the search committee. Can you tell me why everybody calls me to be a part of the search committee? Then she said, yes, I'll tell you the truth, close the door. We just want to make the search committee more diverse and that. So I said, okay, so I'm the token that you want to put in the search committee. I said, I don't mean to be disobedient. I don't want to be a part of it if that is the idea behind it. Then she said, let me tell you the story. Her exact word was, she said, take a look at the human ecology department. It's a 40-year-old white Caucasian hiring another 40-year-old white Caucasian. How does that work? I said, then write a policy that says, this is how many people should be in the committee, and this is the number of diverse people. By doing that, you will include a whole number of people in the committee. And believe me, for the first 2 years, the committee was diverse. They brought in more minorities because they were more minorities were included in the committee. However, the deficiency at the end of it is retaining those faculty members. They just didn't retain them because the faculty members is that, yes, somebody was hired, but the culture did not change, which, as everybody knows, is hard to change a culture. So the issue becomes not just diversity, is equity. How equitable is the system? How many people are you included? And at the end of it, how many people did you retain? That's going to be the big question in it. Just as it's been said, Genevieve, is not who is on your table. Who made that decision? Whose idea was it? Who provided this idea? Was the idea inclusive? Was it debated rather than, hey, okay, well, there were a black person here, a Hispanic person here, a white person here? That is not what inclusion is. Is the idea, is the what the person is saying, is it taken into consideration when making that decision? I always see that as part of the inclusion. And I always say, how do you start with those who are having difficulty discussing this? How do you start this with the administration? I always say food brings everybody together. Start with a potluck. Okay, start with a potluck. Let's celebrate each culture and have those people dress in their cultural attire. I have a friend who is married to a Nigerian. He's white. When he wears African clothes, everybody is looking at him. When people pass him, they turn around to take a look at him. Okay, so you start with that. We start breaking down culture. They start asking, oh, how is this made? How is that made? That inclusivity is seen there rather than just everybody goes to cafeteria and stay in their own table and eat. That food will break down a lot of barriers.
Spoken like a true culinarian, master chef, and hospitality gentleman. So, but you just said something there that really kind of brings us to some of our concluding statements. You know, how do we start making everybody that has listened to this a DEI advocate? If they're unsure of how to start, how do they speak up? How do they bring innovation? In a time where we're worried about retention and we're worried about our scores and we're worried about this, how can DEI be a priority for educational institutions that have other big issues to deal with? How do we start? How do we open up this conversation with our leadership?
To me, this is the biggest issue, and I'll yield to Genevieve. This is the biggest issue. The world is becoming more diverse.
Well, I jumped in so quickly, Marcia. I definitely want you to share your thoughts because I have to be honest, Tina, this was the biggest trigger question you sent us is how does the institution, and my thought was really, and what I mean by that is whatever the institution chooses to focus on and grow and nurture and feed is what they succeed at. You're not going to do 25 things in a year, but you can do 3 to 5 as an institution. And I say that keeping in mind that this brings big pieces of change, a lot of change. People have to travel the curve. It's challenging. It's difficult. This stuff gets at the heart of who we are. But the other side of me is like, we do fantastic work on the things we focus on. It is a choice, and this should just flat out be a choice. And the biggest reason it should be a choice, aside from all of the moral reasons, it should be the right choice. The business reason is unequivocally clear. Innovation thrives in more diverse universities and communities, period. And if you want to win the game, wherever you want to win the game, president, administration, whomever, those are the 2 arguments I have. And so I just apologize. I jumped in on that one because it was an immediate trigger for me that the answer is just so obvious to me. Choose to do it, then do it. But Marcia, I jumped right in on you.
No, that was it. You said it. I knew you would. But that is precisely.
You see, when you were speaking, I was what was going through my mind is reading Steve Jobs' autobiography. When he comes to work, he says, okay, what do we want to invent? What's the next big thing? The team put 20 on the board. They said, okay, we're not going to take 3, which is exactly what you just said. We have 20, but we're not going to take 3. That is why Apple is one of the best, most valuable company today. The same thing we can work on. There could be a whole lot of things, but let's pick the best two and let's work on that. That would be the best one. That is our focus, and that's what we're going to be good at. Apart from potluck, which I said, you could also form an affinity group to include more people. I remember when I was in college, we had an association. I attended University of Houston, Conrad Hilton College of Hospitality. The association was Blacks in Hospitality Association. And I had, there were about 20 Blacks in the hospitality program. Maybe about 7 were members of the association, less than 2, maybe one and a half come to meeting. And during trade fair and other club fair, we are trying to recruit people. People kept telling me, oh, George, I'm not a member of the association because I'm not Black. I had to go to the academic advisor. I said, this is what I'm hearing. We need to change the name of this association to include other people. So we fought for it. A lot of people were against it. And we changed the name from Blacks in Hospitality Association to Association of Culturally Diverse Students. And when we did, believe me, we went from 5 to almost 40. We raised money to go to conferences, and it was one of those conferences that I went in Minnesota in November of 1997 that I had contact to meet Disney recruiters. As the story goes, I ended up working for Disney because that led to my first job. Okay, so that affinity group needs to be formed. Start with potluck, start with affinity group. During that affinity group, if the administrators are present, have a chat with them. What do you think? See what is going on. Can we do this? Can we do that? It starts like that. It's little by little because culture is hard to change. It's not going to be lifted in one day, but brick by brick, there will be success.
Please forgive my intrusion, but I popped in to give the 5-minute warning. So I don't know if you want to try to squeeze in one last brief question or some final remarks.
I think I'd like to invite the panelists to do some final remarks. And Kevin piped up again and said, you know, we invite the administrators into a dark room and turn on the light. I think we all are, by attending this panel, we all are bright lights. And in every single one of you, I thank you for being that bright light for me, for attending today, for shedding light on this. But again, how can we be that bright light? How can we make those changes? And what is just your last thought on this?
All right, I'll start off. I think we have to decide if we're going to be advocates for inclusion. And that's the key. And we have to understand what advocacy means. And I think that's so important. Because as an advocate, you have to understand that your action can reproduce inequality or increase inequality. And I want us to take a step back in the last 2 years, because I'm going to bring something in. George Floyd, he taught us, when you saw those advocates around him begging for George's life, they were advocating, the white female, the Black male, and others urging the officers to stop. As innovation takes place in higher education, and for example, we see algorithmic codes coming in, and we see structures being built for a forward movement towards innovation where the metaverse is going to be used. There's going to be so much innovation. We cannot build these innovative practices on discriminatory policies and ideologies and infrastructures that have been designed to disenfranchise individuals. So my final thought as we go forward and innovate, we must think about the technology coming to the online learner and to higher education and see how we can break down these structures and policies and not build upon existing policies that will make our innovative algorithmic practice for the future practically disenfranchise others from participating based on culture and so forth. That's my final thought.
And what a final thought, but who's going to jump in now?
I agree with everything he said.
That was a great summation, Dr. OG. It was hard because that was so well said, Dr. Jawala. We can't keep basing everything on a system that was not created by people that look like us, act like us, were the age of us, or a university that was created for 19-year-olds. Dr. Feliu, it really is on the cutting edge of that, of a university that is trying to be more inclusive and trying to open up to all types of learners, and seeing those hidden disabilities or those hidden cultural iconic things that lead to better innovation and leads to breaking down the barriers that we all have had in trying to build up more inclusive practices. As we end this, I want to give Wendy a moment too, but I want to thank each of you for taking your time out of the day. You made sure to know that innovation, along with DEI, leads to bigger voices, and you took the time out of your schedule, and all four of you are very, very busy individuals, to come here and speak to all of us. Each one of us that is part of the Innovation Summit, thank you for that. You've enlightened us, you've brightened us, and I appreciate each one of you so very, very much. So thank you for coming today. And I'm going to give you an on-camera applause and turn it back over to Wendy. Thank you all again.
Thank you. And wow, thank you, Tina, for assembling such a distinguished and engaging panel today, and also for creating a safe space